What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, we have about a 20-minute presentation or so that we'll go through and talk a little bit about what the Thoroughfare Plan is and what it is not and what it does and how we put it together and so forth. I'll spend just a minute going through some of the major projects that are currently in the plan. As Kevin said, that we are in this phase of development of the plan. This is just one of several opportunities to comment on the plan and what we've been working on, but we wanted to have something for you to take a look at, and so we're going to talk about both roadways and non-motorized transportation, bicycles, sidewalks, and those kind of things as well. The town is developing this thoroughfare plan jointly for both traffic, car traffic, and non-motorized traffic as well. So a little bit about the Thoroughfare Plan, what it is. This will be an adopted plan that the town will use to help make decisions in terms of growth and development and what roadways need to be implemented as part of various growth projects. It identifies transportation needs, as I mentioned, also such as bicycle and pedestrian facilities as well. This is a long-term plan. And this is a lot of times what keeps us from having big crowds at these. We're talking about roadway projects that are, in some cases, not going to be seen for 20, 25, 30 years. So this is a long-term look at the vision of how Smyrna sees its transportation networks developing over a number of years. So along with that, it's important not to know what the plan does not do. It does not initiate any construction activities, including right-of-way purchase or design or anything like that. Those are activities that are much further down the road in most cases. It doesn't, you're going to see lines on the map, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the road will even go right where you're seeing it. A lot of times what we show in a thoroughfare plan is an ideal for, hey, we know there's growth happening in this area, and we need to reserve some right-of-way for a future connection in this area. It may not be exactly where the line is showing, but it's somewhere in this vicinity, and it can shift based on development proposals that might occur. It also certainly does not mean that these roadway improvements are funded. Some of them are. Some of them are working through more regional plans from the Nashville area MPO and TDOT. And some of these projects have been on the books for a very long time and have some idea of future funding dedicated to them. But nothing that we're showing here tonight means that it is actively progressing through the construction process. So that may sound like it's not that important. It actually is. It is important. It's important to begin thinking about these roadway plans. I'll show you in a minute how this is not a new step. This is an update to an existing plan that's been on the books for quite some time. But it helps developers and town planners to be proactive in developing solutions to meet transportation needs. It also, the third bullet there, sets fair expectations for development. And I'm using that word a lot. And so sometimes what the process is a developer might want to come in and put a subdivision or make improvements to a piece of property. And if this roadway improvement shows up on the plan, he knows what he's expected to do. And that may take the form of dedicating some right-of-way or making payments into a fund in some cases. But it gives them a fair heads up that this is the plan, this is what's being expected. And we can do that now on the front end and not in the heat of a lot of development activities. It gives us some time to think through those things. And that in turn can help us in terms of building partnerships for implementation. I talked about funding of these and how there is not dedicated funding for most of these projects, but often what can happen is as development occurs in the area, sometimes those developer requirements can help the project move further along. Sometimes that's, as I said, in the form of right-of-way dedication or other contributions. And then it also is important to know that it does make this ideal, this vision for the future transportation network known to the public. And so everyone can see what is anticipated in a certain area as far as roadway improvements. So a little bit about the process. There on the left side, you see the current thoroughfare plan that was developed probably back in the early 90s. It was updated most recently, I believe, in 2007. And so this, again, is another update to that. And so that's where we start at the bottom of that pyramid, is reviewing the current plans that are already on the books. And then we seek input like we're doing here tonight, and I'll show you some other examples of that. We've also completed the large part of our assessment of the existing networks. I'm going to show you some results of that here shortly, where we talk about what are the current demands and what are the anticipated future demands that are going to be placed by traffic on the new or on the transportation network. And those, once we look at the future demands, that's going to help us understand what the deficiencies are in our current network, and that's going to help us to determine what the future network should look like. And that's what it is that we're developing here as part of this project. And then we can, at the very top of the pyramid, then establish a plan for how we're going to go about to realize that future network. I mentioned that this is just one part of the input process. We've had several aspects of the input process. Some of it was just at the very early stages, coordinating with the city, with city staff, talking to them about what some of the hot areas in development are. What are you seeing in terms of density, or where are your most common growth areas, and that kind of thing. We widen that out a little bit in a series of interviews with other stakeholders around the city. We want to talk to public safety, want to talk to Nissan, had some conversations with schools and other interested parties like that. That helps us to build a good understanding for what some of the issues are here in Smyrna. Wiki maps is a term you may not be used to seeing. I'll show you a snapshot of that in just a minute. This is still current, and this is where you can actually go in and pull up a map of the town and begin to show us from your computer at home on the internet where you see various problems. It could be crash problems that you've noticed, or operation problems, or things that the city needs to look into more. We've had, as of last week, this is a little bit old, this was early last week, we had well over 200 mapped comments from folks that have gone into that wiki map and said, hey, these are issues that we notice around town that we hope y'all can address at some point in the future. And then lastly, a survey, which is like that, except that's a little more straightforward. To just ask questions. I'll show you some example questions of that, about your thoughts about transportation in Smyrna, things that you see and things that you think need attention. And we've had probably over 300 surveys complete by this time. We had a little over 290 last time. So you may not see a lot of folks in the room, but there's been a lot of input that have kind of brought us to this point. And we've got a lot of great thoughts as we've proceeded through the draft plan. So this is an example of what you might see on that survey, and if you haven't taken it, as I said, it's still up, and you can go and do that, and we would encourage you to do that. And it's questions like these on the survey. What are your, I know this is probably hard to read, what are your priorities for the overall transportation system in Smyrna? Rank the following, with 1 being the highest and 9 being the lowest. And you can see by the blue bars what folks thought. Comes out on top. The highest priority was that it says we need to put attention on reduced congestion and less delay. I think probably everyone in the room could agree with that's a problem that could use some attention. Number 2 is the maintenance of existing roadways, and number 3 was improved safety. So I would look at, and then there's some other things, all of which are good answers, all of which, are important and are things that we're focusing on, but it gives us some direction about what the emphasis areas are currently here in Smyrna, and that's congestion, maintenance, maybe safety in some spots. So those are the things that we're trying to look at and put the highest priority on. Here's another question. How important are the following roadway improvements in addressing Smyrna's transportation needs? And this gets to what are the thoughts about, how do you tackle those things that we saw in the first question? And so you have several options here. Improve the timing of traffic signals, improve the safety of roadways. We saw that earlier. Add and lengthen turn lanes at intersections. And it's interesting how, you start to get a little more detailed in these questions, and people recognize that you know, if that signal would just work a little better, if I had a little more room in the turn lane, I wouldn't have to get stuck behind this guy and I could get into my turn lane. People recognize that. And we've gotten we see that feedback here, but we've gotten a lot of very detailed feedback in that wiki map about where exactly people are talking about. I will say that those type of improvements are small scale relative to what we're looking at for these long-term thoroughfare plan projects. But it gives us a really good sense for what people are thinking about and what the most immediate needs are. And those are things that we can roll into the recommendations of the plan. This is what the wiki map looks like. This is zoomed out at a pretty good level. I don't think my little pointer is working here, but use my finger. You can see I-24 here. You see Almaville Road here, and Sam Ridley there, and Lowry here. And the circles, the big oval that I've put there, is talking about all the comments. All the little yellow circles are comments that people have made at various intersections, usually. And then where I've drawn the big circle, I've just pointed out some clusters for places that we're seeing a lot of comments. And one of those you might guess would be at Sam Ridley Parkway near the I-24 interchange. There's another section here at Almaville Road, and that one really had a lot to do with turn lanes and operations and signal improvements that people felt like could be made at the interchange there. Another one was at Enon Springs Road and Lowry Street, and some of those had to do with the signal, but also the train crossings and how that can change traffic patterns. And then I've got a couple of other red arrows there and here, and you might look at those and say, I don't recognize what street that is, and you're exactly right. Those are not streets. And so while people have put the very concrete types of things like, hey, the signal needs more time or I can't get through or whatever, people also have done us a really great service in designating, here are some ideas. And this is exactly the power of this mapping tool where you can put ideas for what you think might be needed in the future. And that's exactly what we needed to see. And in fact, we'll show you this in just a minute. Our plan doesn't show it exactly like that, but something pretty close. And over here, this would be about where one of our projects is, an extension of Enon Springs on out towards State Route 840. And those were projects that have at least been validated by some of the comments that we've seen in the wiki map. So let me talk for a few minutes about what we're seeing in terms of the existing conditions. And some of this you will probably nod and agree with, and some you may not, and we'll talk about that, and that's okay. The map here on the left is just traffic. AADT is just a fancy way of saying traffic. That's the average annual daily traffic. And it's no surprise we see large volumes on I-24 in those red, warmer colors, and then as you get into the cooler colors, that's less traffic. So you see, large volumes on some of the roads that we've already mentioned, Sam Ridley and Almaville and 840 and various roads. And then the slide on the right are the number of lanes. So, generally you see a corresponding relationship between the number of lanes and the amount of traffic that's being carried. Those are easy things, and those are just facts. Where it begins to differ a little bit maybe from what you might have expected was that we actually take the traffic volumes and we build these into a traffic model. Now, the fortunate thing is we don't have to do that for this project. It's a very time-intensive and expensive project. But the Nashville Area MPO has a regional travel demand model that looks at all 7 counties around the Nashville area, and they've developed this for us. So we're able to benefit from that, use that model, and show some of the results from here in Smyrna, and isolate the model just to look at this area for our purposes. And so this is some of the output we get from those models. You'll notice it is about 5 years old, and that's because that was the last year the census was taken, and that's the year that the model is calibrated to. So when we talk about current or existing, we're generally going back 6 years now and talking about 2010. But for our purposes, when we're looking at a long horizon, that's generally good enough, and it gives us a good baseline feel for where things are. And so you see yellow and red, especially the red areas, being those areas that are congested during the AM and the PM peaks. And you say, I don't see a lot of congestion on there. I thought I would see more. And I'd say you're right. And I think that's partly a factor of it being 6 years ago. And partly it's the way the model works and just, how the color code and all is put on this map. So just because you may not see congestion in places where you experience it every day, the model has some faults in that, it's a very broad scale, and it's not looking at specific intersections when we color it this way. It's looking at roadways and the amount of traffic on different segments of the roadway. So we know it's there, and it's not something that we're not addressing because it may not show up as a red area on this map. I should have set you up for that better, but you see what happens over the next 30 years. We'll talk about why that happens. But now you see congestion, don't you? So we didn't see a whole lot in 2010, and you put that back to your experience on what it's like out there today, and this is what the model predicts we're on our way towards, a scenario where there's congestion on almost every major route. Some of these, the yellow ones, is where we're talking about level of service C and D. Those are very adequate for travel by and large. It doesn't sound like it. Level of service goes A, B, C, D, E, or F. And if you say a C or D, that doesn't sound great. If you think about your kid's report card or something, I don't want to see a D. But really, for our traffic engineer purposes, that's actually pretty good. But a lot of red on that map, and this is one of the reasons why. When we look at the growth that we expect to be coming into this area, and if you're in tune with news reports and newspaper reports, you hear this a lot about 1 million new people in the Nashville area by 2040, and they compare us to Denver and they compare us to a lot of places. That amount of growth is coming. And Smyrna, boy, it really sits in the crosshairs of some of the highest growth areas in the state of Tennessee, with Rutherford County, Williamson County, and Davidson, and you're right in the middle of all of it. And so we expect that Smyrna will get its fair share, or more than its fair share, of growth, and this is what some of the numbers are coming out of the model. Right now, again, it's old. You're at 39,000 folks. I think you're more like 49 probably right today. So we're well on our way to the 2040 number that you see here of 63,000 people. That's just inside what are today's town limits of Smyrna. And then if you look at, you can see the employment there growing by about 16,000 jobs. And then the little chart below where it says urban growth boundary, this is the bluish area on the outside that the town has designated as this is the area that we expect to grow at some point in the future, and not beyond that. And it's interesting to look at the amount of growth in that what is today more of a rural area. Actually, the bigger part of the growth percentage-wise is in that area, going from about 14,000, adding 30,000 new people in this area outside of the town limits. And so that's one thing that we're looking at quite a bit is that has implications on the amount of travel that has to be done distance-wise to get back to I-24, to get to Franklin or to Murfreesboro or to Nashville for jobs and the commute and that kind of thing. So we look at the total number of population growth. The total amount of population growth is going to basically double. We're looking at a 104% increase in population, a 62% increase in employment, and you can imagine what that means for travel impacts. I mean, if there are twice the number of folks living here, it's going to stand to reason that there's a substantial amount of new travel that's going to want to take place on the roadway network, and we'll look at those numbers in a minute. The other thing that this shows us, too, is interesting, is about the nature of that travel. If you look at how much the population is going to grow, we would hope to see a commensurate increase in the amount of employment that's going to take place, and we don't necessarily see that. So the population is growing a little bit faster than what we expect the employment to grow here in Smyrna, and the reason why that's important is because, of course, that leads to more commuting, and that's more travel. So there's not as many people being able to stay close by their home to work. They're having to continue to travel, to other communities to do that. So let me jump and talk a little bit about the existing conditions. We'll come back to roadway, but the existing conditions on our bicycle and pedestrian networks, one of the things that we look at is what we call the low stress streets analysis, and this is where we look at a pretty basic level, at a planning level, all of the roadways within our study area, and assign them a stress level of 1 to 4 based on how people feel trying to navigate those streets without a car, whether they're walking or riding a bicycle. And we can map those, and this is a fairly straightforward exercise. We look at the amount of traffic on the road. Is there a shoulder? Is there a sidewalk? How wide are the lanes? How fast is the traffic moving? The things that you think make walking on a road comfortable or not comfortable, those are the things that we look at in doing this. And so we can map those, and we see probably some things that are pretty common sense, really, in terms of how stressful these streets are. So you see roads like Sam Ridley is black. Of course, the interstate's black. That would be pretty stressful to walk along that. Lowry Street, black. Again, a lot of that's lack of sidewalks in those areas. Old Nashville Pike. But then there's a whole lot of green in that area too, and those are local streets that you might live on that are neighborhood-oriented streets. They may or may not have sidewalks, but there's low volume, and the traffic's moving very slowly, and they're very comfortable to walk on, and that's what you're seeing in those. And so sometimes our objective in looking at this is to say, well, how could we connect more of these pockets of green? Are there roadway improvements or things that we could do to help people move around the city, whether by choice or by the necessity, without the use of a vehicle? And so that's the point of this low stress streets analysis. And here's a couple of examples that we found. The one on the left there is Smyrna High School, and just south of it, right down in this area, is the neighborhood along Pioneer Drive. And you see, we know that there's a portion of the student body that lives in that neighborhood, but that would have a very hard time walking to the school because you don't see any connection there along Lee Victory right there. And even if there were a connection, that's not a very safe place. I wouldn't want my child to have to cross at that location. But there are some improvements that could be made to that to foster that connection, to make that a safer crossing that might be very adequate and might help us connect that area of green, low-stress street on the south side to the high school. There's another case there at Cedar Grove Elementary, more in the northern part of the study area, just off Sam Ridley, and the apartments there along Cheney Drive. A very similar example there where the apartments and the school did not have a connection, but one could be retrofitted in quite possibly. And so those are the kind of things that we look at. Small-scale projects, but could have a big impact for people who might have students living nearby and can't walk to school as it is now. Along those lines, some of the objectives that we've been looking at. I mentioned this is an update. This was the last time that it was updated was I mentioned back in earlier in the 2000s as part of the comprehensive plan, and transportation was one component of that. And at that time there were two main goals, and one dealing more with quality of life issues. We wanted to make sure that the roadways were being planned to foster that quality of life. That's still a big goal, still a big part of what we're doing. And then the second transportation goal had to do more with the multimodal aspect, to be sure we're giving options for walking and biking as appropriate. One thing as we've gone through this schedule of public input and targeted stakeholder input, was that we really want to adjust to make sure that goal number one really stresses what we saw on that bar chart a minute ago, that we're doing everything we can to plan roadways, yes, that enhance our quality of life and our aesthetic and promote the image that Smyrna has done a great job of building up all these years, but also we want to make sure, things aren't very pretty if we're just sitting in traffic, and so we want to make sure we can do our best to keep transportation options open and keep things moving. And so emphasizing congestion mitigation is a big part of that. So let me get into a little bit about what's being planned, what's on the maps you'll see behind you currently. And I do want to emphasize that these are draft. We're still working through comments and working through things that you might tell us here tonight or that we're finding in the wiki map and in the survey responses as well. We're moving towards finalizing this draft, but it is very much a draft at this point, so we welcome any of your feedback on any of these. It's really in two different parts. The one part on the left is the roadway map. We've just sort of broken it out this way. And the part on the right there is the bicycle and pedestrian map. And so on that one, you'll see things like greenways and trails, and we'll talk about the various things you'll see on that here in a second. And I know this isn't the most visible thing either. That project right there is number 18. It's a big red line that comes south. That's the one we were looking at earlier that folks had said, you know, this extension of Sam Ridley would really be nice down to the south to head us toward 840. And we didn't draw it off of Sam Ridley, but this is one that's been on the books for a while. All of the ones, and I should say this, all of the ones that are in any color other than purple have been on the books. We didn't change them. We might have adjusted the alignment slightly, but in concept, those projects have been on the books at least since 2007. The purple ones, however, are ones that are new in this draft of the plan, so you might want to note that as you look at the map. But the big red line headed to the south is actually Rocky Fork Road. Some of you may be aware that the town has been interested in a new interchange on Rocky Fork Road for quite some time. That continues to be in the plan, and so that road would be an extension off of that interchange at I-24 on south all the way down to 840. The other thing that does is it lessens the need to do major rehab work on Almaville Road, which would be quite expensive, you know, given that there's houses and things all along it. It takes off on a new alignment. There's not a road there now where you see that red line, and so that would mitigate that need. I mentioned the interchange. You might can see that right there. That would be the new interchange at Rocky Fork. Now, there were some minor adjustments that have been made very recently based on some information about the new school that's being planned in that area. So we are aware of those. There is another road that has been on the books for a while, and that's this red line here. That is a new connection. Again, it's not an existing roadway. It would be a new alignment for a better connection over towards Williamson County and the town of Nolensville. We know that's the big commuting pattern over toward I-65 in the Cool Springs area every day. That's another one that is just remaining on the plan. One that is new that I would point out, it's in purple, is this one here. And so this is Almaville Road, the little yellow interchange there. And this is a new one. This is a proposed Baker Road interchange. So that one has not shown up before, and we're seeing the need for better access into that corner of the urban growth boundary again in the long term. And so we've gone ahead and shown it on this draft, and welcome your feedback on that. So that was the south part of the area, and there are a lot of other ones, obviously, that I'm not talking about for the sake of time. A lot of those are smaller scale connections that open up some land that is currently undeveloped, but again, it's good to set the groundwork for a good connected network of new roadways to be out ahead of the development, so those can get implemented over time. In the north area, the Sam Ridley Parkway widening, that is a project that is on the books through the MPO. There is a Weekly Lane widening. That is a new project that we are seeing the need for to go to a wider cross section on Weekly Lane to the north. One I mentioned earlier was this Enon Springs Road extension on out to 840 there. That one would relieve some congestion, especially getting into the backside of Nissan, and it'd be a good project from a freight standpoint. And in fact, Enon Springs has several different things. We are looking at the widening of it in its entirety through the city, and also an extension on the south end back down toward the new interchange at Rocky Fork Road. So that would become a corridor kind of bisecting through the city at that point. I'll talk a little bit about the results of all of this, and you know the the efforts and the millions of dollars and all that it would take to develop this plan, it's important to think about what the improvements might be. And I know this is hard to see, and even as you sit there and study this for a while, it's hard to pull a lot of insight out of it, perhaps. But these are just 3 maps showing what we call volume to capacity ratios. It's just looking at how well are we using the roadway network, or how congested it is, how over capacity it is. From the traffic volumes. And so on the far left there, that's, again, today, or as best we have it, from a 2010 baseline condition. And then in the middle, we're looking at 24 without any improvements, and then 2040 with improvements on the far right. And that is hard to pull anything out of. So we try to put it into some numbers. I'm not sure it's a whole lot easier, but I'll try to walk you through these and not get too not regress too much to my engineering tendencies on this. We have, again, those 3 scenarios, 2010, 2040 if we didn't do anything, and 2040 with the improvements. And we talked about that population growth. And so look at what that does from the total amount of volume on the roadway network. So this is the sum total of all the cars going back and forth on the roadway network. Today we're just a little over 9 million vehicles per day on the roadway network within the study area. We basically expect that to double. It would follow right in line with that population growth. It doesn't vary. It comes a little bit more out of the peak. That's why we look at AM and PM for volume, but it's pretty much in line with the peak periods. The VMT is vehicle miles traveled, so we look at total how much roadway travel is being done in terms of a mileage. That about doubles, but the interesting was the next one to me. VHT is vehicle hours of travel, and it jumps up almost 3 times. Whether you do things, various improvements or not, and so that's a big jump in how much time it's going to take, and that indicates that while we're going to have twice the amount of travel, but that's going to result in quite a bit more time to make that travel from everybody on the roadway. VCAM is just volume to capacity in the AM, and you see that worsening. It's in that category where you begin to see some of the benefit of doing these projects. We're at about 67% of capacity versus 73% if we don't do anything. So you do get some benefit in those peak periods out of some of these projects. And I'll show you some more of that in particular. And then the last one is just how fast travel can occur in terms of the percentage of free flow speed. It's going to get slower, but be a little less slow if we do some of the projects. So one of the things to try and even get through those numbers even better was to look at some of the major arterials, especially that cross I-24. One of the things I know that, say like Murfreesboro is a good example, where they've had a tremendous amount of growth on both sides of I-24, and one thing they continue to look at is, what are that I-24 almost serves as a barrier to them, and they're looking at various crossings and how can they reduce the impacts of that barrier. So we wanted to look at that same thing here and look at those roadways: Sam Ridley Parkway, Almaville Road, Rocky Fork, Rock Springs, Baker, any of those roads that have a crossing of I-24. See what some of these improvements would do to those roads, because those can be vitally important to us. And we're starting with 2 good ones, Sam Ridley and Almaville, the 2 places where the major interstate access occurs today. And if you went through all of these numbers, I can just tell you the travel statistics on these 2 roads get better, and I'll show you why they get better. But there's less travel on these 2 roads. That means there's less congestion. That means the speeds are higher, and it's a pretty a fairly, relatively rosy picture, I guess, for these 2 major arterials, which is good. And some of our improvements were targeted toward relief of these 2 roadways. Rock Springs Road is one that gets a little worse, but doesn't have a tremendous impact on whether you do the projects or not. You see the volume there goes up less than 1,000 cars a day, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but in the grand scheme, that one continues to perform fairly adequately. Rocky Fork Road and Baker Road, Rocky Fork especially, gets worse, and we would expect that. You're putting a new interchange on the roadway, so travel is going to increase on that, but it's going to do what we want it to do, and that's attract some of that. That's why some of that traffic is coming off of Sam Ridley Parkway or off of Alma Road, because some of it is being attracted now to Rocky Fork Road at the new interchange. So it's pulling off of some and attracting it to itself. Baker Road is kind of the same way. This is a little bit misleading for Baker Road because we're showing here the existing Baker Road, and when we show the new one that would have a proposed interchange on it, it's attracting some of the traffic off. That's why it goes from 12,000 down to 6 under the proposed scenario. Let me talk just a minute, so when you go to the maps, you'll be aware of what some of the colors mean and what we're talking about from a non-motorized facility standpoint. We'll shift gears a little bit here. So there are 3 types of improvements we can look at: on street, off street, or something that's being done a little bit in the middle. On street you might be familiar with in the form of bike lanes or different things we can do from an intersection standpoint, pedestrian push buttons, for example. Off street you're probably most familiar with. It's things like you enjoy already with the greenway system here, and then hybrid or sometimes somewhere in between. We won't talk a lot about those. Those are much more urban setting treatments and things that we don't have here yet in Smyrna. So the on-street facilities, as I mentioned, those can be as simple as a sign on a shoulder designating a road as a bike route. It could be a wide outside lane, which again you don't even notice really if you're a car, but if you're a cyclist you sure appreciate a few extra feet if you're trying to ride that road. Bike lanes are the classic one. You have some of those here. You have some on Lee Victory now, and what's being done more often, if you can, is to buffer those with like this treatment here. We've got a little more separation, a little more width between moving traffic and the cyclist. You still don't have a lot of bike lanes here in Smyrna because what's really preferred is something like I'll show you in just a minute in the form of a trail or even a greenway. But paved shoulder can be a very adequate solution, especially in rural areas where the speed may or may not be high, but the volume's not usually high, and sometimes these shoulders get to be 10 or 12 feet, and it's very adequate for a cyclist who might want to ride on that. You see that more in rural areas. Multi-use paths, you have some of these here. These can take a number of different looks. So something like what's alongside Sam Davis Road, we would consider a multi-use path. You've built some that look like a sidewalk, but they're extra wide, and those are serving as a multi-use path. We call that off-street. It's really on the right-of-way. Sometimes really it's like a sidewalk, and so it feels like it's on street. But it is separated at least by a curb, so it's somewhat protected, and it feels safer. And then greenways are kind of the ultimate, and a lot of communities are saying, that's what we want. That's the gold standard, and we want to build as much greenway as we can because we know people feel comfortable using those, and we try to connect those everywhere. But we know we can't build greenways if you want to connect things like schools or commercial areas. We can do a lot of greenway, but at some point you got to mix with traffic, most likely, if you want to access these destinations. And so we try to do a combination of all of those. And so when you go back there, you'll see some of the recommendations for especially greenways. You'll want to note those in this lime green color. All of those are new. The dark green are your existing greenways. The purple color there are the existing and the proposed trails if they're dotted. And again, that can take a little bit of a varied look. It could look like a sidewalk. It could look like a couple of things. And then the last thing you'll see predominantly would be the proposed sidewalks. We have talked about this with the town council and with the planning commission. And one of the things that came up there, which was very good, was that, we don't show sidewalks on every road, and that's true. And that doesn't mean there wouldn't be sidewalks on every road. But what we're trying to show in this map are these could actually be standalone projects. We think they're important enough that the city might desire to do a standalone sidewalk project for some of these. For a lot of them, when we're just building a roadway, we don't necessarily think it warrants a standalone sidewalk project, but if you're going to build a new roadway anyway, we think sidewalks need to be a part of that, generally speaking. So I don't want you to think that this is a comprehensive look at the sidewalk network. It's not that. It's really just those projects that we think are really extra important to look at from a pedestrian mobility standpoint.
Well, tonight's meeting was about gaining more public input for our Thoroughfare Plan and Bicycle Pedestrian Plan update. The next steps from here will be we'll finish this up, take this input, finish up the plan. We will take it to the Planning Commission for adoption, and ultimately the council also would review it and hopefully endorse it as well.
Well, I've had an opportunity to participate in meetings like this before, so I think it went really well. The piece where they break out into the maps and you actually get to write on the map and write down your ideas and talk about the things that you think will be beneficial, that's really where kind of the rubber meets the road. That's where the citizen input really comes to bear. So I know from our revitalization project downtown, there were some things that were very specifically that I wanted to make sure were on there, like for example the CSX pedestrian crossway there connecting Lowry and Front Street. It's really imperative if we're going to continue to grow that area and try to make that a more pedestrian friendly area. We've got to have that. Very expensive project, so I wanted to make sure it was on there.
I've been in Smyrna now for about 8 years now, and this is kind of where we've our kids are growing up here now, and then we're kind of a part of the community, so we're looking to try to be more involved in things like this and see where it's going, where the town's going, where our leaders are taking us, and obviously if we have issues, we want to voice our opinion on it. So I live in a town where there's going to be a new school popping up next year. They're going to start building up right in the backside of our neighborhood. So new roads are always going to have to go in to kind of help the congestion areas. And, what are they going to do to my road? That was kind of my main concern coming into this. So so they've highlighted some areas that kind of makes me feel better about it, and the things they're doing should be the right way. So.
Well, we're targeting the entire city limits plus what we call the urban growth boundary. That's our study area that we are looking at. But certainly there are areas that are of interest to a lot of people. Things come to mind like Sam Ridley Parkway, which people know. They sit in traffic on there, and there's a lot of intersections. There's been a lot of development. It's done a lot of great things for the town. But with that comes traffic problems, and so that's one of the things we're working to address. There are some other problems that people have noticed. The interchange at Almaville Road is one that comes to mind. And then other people have done really great in terms of giving us really good suggestions for new roadway connections or other improvements that we may not have thought of. So we appreciated everyone coming out and giving us that feedback. But I'll tell you, I think some of the best ones are ones that are big, pie in the sky type of things. There's a famous saying that says make no small plans, and that's one of the things we've tried to put an eye towards on this, that we think outside the box, and there's a lot of innovative things coming in this industry with self-driving cars, and transit is a big part of what we're talking about here in Middle Tennessee, and we need to begin to think about that here in Smyrna, and how can we tie into our bigger regional community from a transportation standpoint.